Hello and welcome to our masterclass here on how to make better strategy in 2025. My name is Dr. Mark Snickers and I have the pleasure of leading you through our webinar here today. Now let's get started. So welcome, as I said, and just to get us started, why not just put into the chat where you are joining us from. And so we know a little bit who is here and we have some context. And thank you and congratulations for making it into this session, actually. So what are we going to do in the next about 45 minutes? So first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about why old school strategy or the perception of old school strategy is actually that. What are the problems that we are having with traditional strategy? And then we'll talk about how to make better strategy, and I'll give you a clear concept on how to do strategy, how to think about strategy, and a process for how to do strategy. And we're gonna finish off with some Q&A at the end. So if in between you have any kind of questions, feel free to just put them into the chat as well. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Mark Snickers. So I have some 20 years of experience, going on 23 now, actually, working with executive teams, leadership teams, CEOs, business owners, helping them to design and actually execute winning strategies. I've worked with all kinds of different businesses, small, medium, large, very often with divisions, business units, local country organizations, which are part of larger groups, and which of some of which you can actually see here. Now, before I go into the presentation, let me just ask you, if you hear strategy, what do you think about? What is the picture, the words, the definitions, maybe the stuff that comes into your head when you talk about or you think about strategy? And I'm going to come back to some of these things later on in the presentation. Now, let's start with this idea of old school strategy. Is that, or why some people say that actually 97% of traditional strategic planning are a waste of time, effort, and organizational energy. Now, if you look at studies, and there are plenty, I just picked one here, which is quite popular from Strategy and the consulting arm of PricewaterhouseCoopers. We could easily say, or it's fair to say actually, that strategy does not work anymore, right? And lots of people complain about different aspects of strategy. So here you see some numbers from this study. It doesn't matter what study you look at, they all come to the same kind of conclusion, right? It's not clear enough, the strategy is not meaningful enough, it's not meaningful, differentiated enough, it's not bold enough. And then when we talk more about the execution, so this is problems with strategy itself already. When we talk about execution, not enough or not sufficient resources. It's not really translated into tangible actions, which is often the problem with bad strategy. I would say that it's difficult to actually translate it into tangible actions. That's actually where I come from. So my background, I started more with strategy execution, doing a lot of change management and organizational transformation. And there, so you're being handed a strategy that needs to be implemented, but if you look at it, it's actually very difficult to implement because the strategy is already bad to start with. And then, 74% here, the last number, say that the strategy asks them to work on too many priorities, which is also one of the challenges that we see with traditional strategy, that it's a long list of stuff to do and not really strategy. And all of this then, again, various studies leads to, I would say, catastrophic results, really, if you think about all the time, the money, the effort that's put behind developing strategies. And if you then look at the results, and again, various studies ranging from 70 to 90% of strategies failing, it's really a catastrophic result, again, if you look at all the resources that were put behind. And in my experience, there are three root causes to these problems. And the first one is about not having a clear definition or not being clear what strategy actually is. There's a lot of misconception out there. There's a lot of noise also out there about what is strategy really. Is it about goals, as some of you said? Is it about direction, prioritization, choice, and focus? Yeah, I kind of like that. Is it about vision, and so on and so forth? So not very clear on what strategy is. And I'm going to share a definition with you that actually works in any walk of life. It works in your company. It works also in your personal life even. And within your company, it works in all departments and functions. And I promise you that just by changing or adopting an aligned definition of strategy, well, you're going to see already 10x in results and in the performance of your company. Well, we're going to come to that. Second reason is question of how to do strategy. And here is a study published by Harvard Business Review, which came to the conclusion that most leaders are actually not very good at doing strategy, or not very effective at doing strategy. So here you see they looked at is the leader good at developing strategy on the bottom, and is the leader good at executing strategy? And as you can see already, like 35% are bad at either. So they're not good at developing strategy, but they're also not good at executing strategy. Only 1% is really very effective when it comes to developing strategy. Only 1% is really effective when it comes to executing strategy. And only 8% of leaders are good when it comes to developing and executing strategy. So, and again, lots of people think they are really good at strategy. They know what strategy is. They know how it works. But then if you look at a study like this, if you look at the results, it's quite obvious that that's not really reality. Then this is what happens in many organizations. So the question of what you're calling strategy, is it really strategy? And here's a quote from Richard Rummelt, the author of Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, that many of you probably heard of. It's a very good book, highly recommended. And so he says that, yeah, very often what companies do when they call it strategy, it's not really strategy. So it's planning, it's goal setting, but it has nothing really to do with strategy. And all these things kind of lead to, again, another study here. It's the last one that I'm going to share. The second was the last one actually that I'm going to share. But so this leads to CEOs saying that 97% of strategic planning is really a waste of time and effort, and it robs the organization of essential energy. Now, all of what I said before kind of leads to strategies that look like this. And this is what we would call a bad strategy. So you have a list here of goals, kind of very, very fluffy in some extent. It's a long list of stuff that needs to do. So going back to this idea of we don't know what to prioritize. So what would you prioritize here? Well, there is not really a priority. Maybe one is more important than two. We don't know. Some of these things are actually contradictory. So if you want to be an innovation leader, then it's probably going to be difficult to be a cost leader. If you want to optimize your cost, like it says here in point 3, it's probably going to be difficult to hire additional staff, like it says in point 4. So this is what bad strategy looks like, but this is unfortunately what we see a lot in organizations. And I see lots of PowerPoint slides where we see these kind of strategies. And it's a shame really, because good strategy actually has a very positive impact on your company performance. Bad strategy can have a devastating impact on your company, but good strategy can also have a very positive impact. And again, various studies here, these numbers are actually all taken from serious academic peer-reviewed studies, which in some cases followed companies over decades. And they come all to the conclusion that if you have a good strategy, you grow faster, you are more profitable. And if you have even a formal strategy, so written down formal strategy, and you do have a formal strategic management process in place, then these companies see better results across 80% of different performance indicators that were observed here. Sometimes we think that strategy is not necessary because the environment is so VUCA and volatile and it changes quite a lot. And again, quite the contrary is the case. If you think about strategy as this bad strategy, this strategic planning that we just talked about, then yes, I agree with you that it's not really worth the paper or the slides it's written on in a high turbulent environment. But a good strategy actually helps you to navigate a highly turbulent environment. And as I know that many of you are working in small and medium companies, or you might be working in a larger company but have a responsibility over a smaller or a medium-sized company, you're thinking that strategy is only for the big corporates. And here again, research proves that strategy is even, the relationship between strategy and performance is even higher in small or medium-sized businesses. And this is academic research. Here are some of the results that I have achieved with my clients. So in some cases, we were able to grow revenues and the bottom line by 50% over only 12 months. And I'm not talking about going from 500,000 to 750,000, but I'm talking about going from 10 million to 20 million to 30 million, from 20 million to 30 million. So an increase of 10 million for new growth, for example. We see a boost in customer satisfaction. A clear strategy helps you to increase also the execution. If it's a good strategy, more engaged employees because they know what to focus on. They are aligned to what really matters most. And a good strategy also helps you as a leader to have really clarity and confidence in what you're doing and how you're executing your strategy. Quite interestingly, the more engaged employees, so very often it's employees who actually ask for a clear strategy or a better strategy so that they can do a better job by knowing what to focus on, etc. Now, so this was just some of my experience and some of the research that I shared, and I'd like to hear from you how this actually resonates with your experience. So again, if you have some ideas, thoughts here, then please put them into the chat. I'm just looking at some of the comments you said. So Maria says, yeah, I guess the strategy slide I showed very similar to how my slides looked alike. Goal-driven planning, yeah. So Salim, we're going to go back to this idea of goals and planning when it comes to strategy. Choices, goals, choice and focus, prioritization, direction, yeah. So I like these things a lot. Path finding, Mike, yeah. So it's about finding your path towards a direction. So we're also going to talk about what does that path finding actually mean in very specific terms. And Maria adds, is it path definition? So I guess it's a little bit of both, really. Good. So this is about why, or the problems with traditional strategic planning. So what can you do differently? How can you make better strategy? And this brings me to what I call the Better Strategy OS. So which is my approach, my concept to strategy, which on the one hand is based on rigorous academic research and academic practice, but also on my experience having worked with all sorts of companies all over the world for the past 20 years. And in my experience, what you need to be able to make good strategy is three things. So you need, first of all, a clear definition. Again, there is so much confusion around what strategy is, which leads to lots of discussions in companies. And if you ask a leadership team of 5 people in your organization, you probably get 6 different definitions of what strategy is. Right? So we're all talking about strategy, but we're all talking about a slightly different thing. So you need a clear definition. And again, as I said earlier, just by having a clear definition, that's going to increase your performance already dramatically. Then you need a structured framework for thinking about strategy. So question is, if you think about strategy, what do you think about actually? Do you think about these goals? Do you think about plans? Do you think about the paths that you want to find? Well, there are clear frameworks available for what to focus on. What are the key questions you need to ask yourself when you're thinking about strategy? And what are actually the paths, also the generic paths, the generic strategies, if you like, that you can explore for answers? And having such a clear structured framework is going to help you and your team actually to move ahead with designing a strategy and executing a strategy so much faster, because you avoid a lot of unnecessary discussions and you can actually focus on what really matters. And then finally, you need a systematic process for doing strategy. And here also I'm not talking about a process, the traditional, let's spend a lot of time on analysis, then do the development of the strategy, then plan the execution, and then eventually maybe go into execution. But I'm talking about a process that helps you to actually design your strategy, activate your strategy, track your strategy, review your strategy, update your strategy if you think it's necessary, or whether if it becomes obvious that it's necessary. And that kind of helps you to turn your strategy, as I call it, always on. So it's really not about cascading your strategy, executing, implementing your strategy, but it is at the end of the day really about living your strategy on a daily basis. Now, let's go into each of these three in a little bit more of a detail. So, what is strategy? Here's a very clear definition. Strategy is the answer to the challenges you're facing when it comes to achieving your ambitions. Well, let that just sit for a second. This is the essence, this is the core of strategy. Now, this is a good definition because, first of all, it's very clear, and it always works. It works in business, but it also works in economics, it works in politics, it works in your personal life. And if you're talking about business, it works everywhere in your business. It works on the corporate level, it works on the business level, it works on the country level, it works in every department and function. And we're going to come back to that when we talk about functional strategy a little bit later. But this is really the core of strategy. So strategy is the answer to the challenges you face in achieving your ambitions. And if I say challenges here, I don't necessarily mean something bad or a problem, right? But a challenge in a more kind of neutral way. So it's really a set of circumstances that require you to reconsider your current course of action. Maybe because you have a new vision. So that's a circumstance that requires you to reconsider your strategy, or maybe it is because you are facing a challenge that you need to overcome. So it's really about either, so a challenge could be, it's either to profit from an opportunity or it is to respond to a threat. And here is a very easy example. So I took Netflix as an example because we all know Netflix and we can relate to it. Now, here is what Netflix says on its website about the ambition. So they want to entertain the world. And they are very clear about the where to play, if you like. So they want to give us access to best-in-class TV series, documentaries, feature films, and mobile games. They are also a little bit later on the website very clear about what they don't want to do. For example, they don't want to do adult movies. They don't want to do anything that's live, which is a little bit of a contradictory if you follow the news with the women's soccer games. They're going to broadcast in 2027 and 2030. So curious to see how that works. But this is the core of their strategy. They do one simple subscription, which is different than an Apple strategy, for example, because Apple has a different subscription for Apple TV, and then they have a different subscription for the live sports, the NFL that you can watch, and they have a different subscription for mobile games. Well, Netflix says, no, we have just one subscription, and so on. So very clear strategy. Now, over the time, they had to work on certain challenges to actually be able to work towards this ambition. So first of all, I mean, you all know they came from DVDs and they saw an opportunity to go into streaming, launching a streaming platform. So the strategy was here really to shift from DVDs to streaming, and the challenge was how to seize that opportunity. Then obviously you stream, you need to get content. One of the challenges, how do we get content? And in the beginning, the focus was exclusively on licensing content from large Hollywood studios. So they went for licensing. Apple does most of its own productions. Amazon had a different strategy. They bought MGM, so they kind of bought the whole catalog, which they can now stream. So Netflix strategy was we license it. Now, over time, competition increased. So lots of people saw that streaming is a good business, and they launched their own services. So you have stuff like HBO, you have Paramount Plus, you have Disney Plus, and so on and so forth. So it got a little bit more difficult to get access to good content. On top of that, you had Amazon, you have Apple, in the US you have Hulu, and so on. So more competition for the content. So content was more difficult to get from Netflix. And the strategy was to produce their own blockbuster content. So House of Cards, the first one that is probably the most prominent still. Then another challenge came up. producing their own content is expensive, and there was actually a time where Netflix had some cash flow issues because they spend all the money on these blockbuster TV series, but the revenues or the subscriptions didn't pick up fast enough. They were still very dependent on the large Hollywood studios who had to produce that content, and with the global expansion, there was also the challenge that global audiences, they wanted to have more localized content. So the strategy was to go a little bit away from only producing its own blockbuster content and licensing to finance and license and distribute more independent local productions. So these days you see lots of different series from the UK, from the Nordics, even from Luxembourg, where I'm from. There is stuff that they license and distribute on a international level. And we could say that maybe in one of the latest moves, how to further differentiate from competitors, well, they added mobile games to the offer. So you can see how the ambition, the vision is still the same. The core of the strategy, where to play, how to win, is clear. But along the way, you have certain challenges that need to be navigated and that need to be solved so that you can actually work towards your ambition. Now, some of you might say, well, is this not too reactive? What about the long-term planning view? What about the long-term vision? Because very often we think that strategy needs to be long-term. Well, here's the answer to that. So first of all, it's not about giving up your long-term vision. So the idea is that you zoom out into the future and you are clear about your aspirations for the future, but then you zoom back into today and you think about, so what are the challenges that you currently face on your way to reaching your ambitions? And again, the challenge could be there is an opportunity that we need to seize. So the challenge is how to seize that opportunity, or there is a real challenge, a problem that you need to solve. But then you only focus on that. And this is where this idea of, long-term planning, yes, it's not helpful in a VUCA world, but this approach allows you to adapt to what is the challenge that you're currently focusing on in the next maybe 12 months, maybe 18 months, right? And then once that challenge is solved, you can look at what is the next step that we need to take, always having your ambition and your core strategy in mind. Now, that's one view to how to reconcile this idea of, well, does it not need to be long-term versus the short-term? Which also in having this approach makes it so much easier to actually implement strategy, because very often in organizations, they have so many day-to-day problems today that there is no headspace to really think about the long term. So in this sense, you're making strategy really by default already, if you like, really actionable and really implementable, if you like. Here's a different way to look at it. Very often when we think about, okay, we need a new strategy, it's not really about the long term, right? And these are kind of like 4 situations that I have encountered in my professional life. So the first one is really, and that's kind of like the first stage of strategy maturity, if you like. There is no core strategy, or the core strategy is not really clear. So you have not really defined your core, where to play, meaning who is our market, who is our customer, what are we offering them, and how are we going to win as a business? How are we going to win over our customers? So that's the first step. You need to be very clear on your core strategy. Then the second stage is, well, your core strategy is clear, but it might need some tweaking here and there. So this is really the core idea of that challenge-based strategy. So where you're zooming back into today and you need to tweak. So this is Netflix going away from only licensing to also producing, from only licensing and producing, or producing its own content, to licensing more and financing more local content. So this is really that adaptation as you go along. And only then, so once 1 and 2 are clear, so you have a core strategy and it's working and you are actually tweaking it along the way, then you start thinking about what comes tomorrow. So what is next? And then after that, if stage 3 is kind of clear, so tomorrow is clear, the adjacencies are clear, then you can start thinking about the longer term, the more transformational stuff, maybe what comes after tomorrow. So you need to focus on where you're at with your strategy at the moment. And being in a position as a leader or CEO, especially if you are in a position where 1 and 2 are clear and you can really focus on 3 and 4, that's really a great place to be, because you don't have to worry about your operational day to day, and you can really start thinking about the future. And here's just a small little tool to show you that I often use this idea of how to prioritize strategic challenges. And we do this, I call it strategy triage. So the question is, does the challenge actually threaten the survival of the organization or not? And obviously, if something is so important that it actually would threaten the survival, and again, it could be a problem or it could be a missed opportunity, then that has a higher priority than stuff that does not threaten the survival of the company. And the second dimension is whether it actually impacts the whole organization or only a part of it. So very often in leadership teams or in discussions in the organization, you know it better than I, lots of stuff is being discussed, but more on a siloed level, and it's only relevant for us in HR or us in marketing or us in sales, but it doesn't really have an impact on the organization as a whole. So the first priority should always be to something that impacts the organization as a whole and actually threatens the survival of your organization. Then you continue with threats to the survival, but only maybe in a part. So maybe it's only relevant to supply chain, but if the supply chain doesn't work, then obviously that has an impact on the entire organization. So you can go back to, so you focus on that, and then you focus on challenges that maybe are not that threatening, but they impact the whole organization, and only last challenges that impact only a part of the organization. So that kind of helps to fine-tune a little bit what you should be focusing on to avoid overwhelming the organization and having to work on too many things in parallel. Good. Again, I'd like to hear from your comments, just looking at some of the stuff that you posted there. What do you think about this idea of challenge-based strategy? Yeah, good. So, strategy is rare, says James. Yes, I would agree to that. Good strategy, at least, is very rare. Alan, yeah, you need to decouple corporate strategy, business unit. Yeah, we're going to come to that next. That's actually a good transition to the next part, which is the structured framework. Now, again, if you only take this challenge-based view of strategy, you're already doing a good job, and you will be better than, let's go with 92% of the other organizations. Now, obviously, every organization has its own strategic challenges that it needs to solve. But nevertheless, there is a set of what I call foundational strategic questions that every organization needs to answer, which brings us to this structured framework to think about strategy. So just pause for a second and think for yourself. If you think about strategy, what is it that you actually think about? Right? Are you very clear about what you need to think about? Do you have a map, so to speak, of what strategic questions you need to ask and answer? Now, here is a structured framework for thinking about strategy. So the idea is that there are 4 different levels of strategy, you could say. Well, there is a network, so it's it's many companies kind of working together, and they can have a strategy that is, let's say, similar, or a strategy that is aligned. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute. But the core idea, or the core question you need to ask about in network strategies, where and for what purpose do you want to collaborate with other companies in your network, in your ecosystem? The second level is then we're going into the company, and this is corporate strategy. Right? So the question here is really about what businesses do you want to be active in? And although we call it corporate strategy, it's not just for big corporates. This is a very, very, very relevant question for small and medium companies. And I've seen many small and medium companies struggle because they had made the wrong kind of corporate level strategy. So here, what businesses do you want to be active in? And I'm going to show you more details in a minute, but it's really a question of, are you going to build a portfolio of diverse companies, or are you building a portfolio of companies that are aligned and integrated, and you're looking for synergies? Then the next level is business strategy. So this is the question of how do you compete in these businesses that you decided to be in on a corporate level? And actually most strategy frameworks that you see, like Playing to Win, the strategy cascade, it's more on the business level. I have a post, can share the link afterwards in the comments, where I combine corporate strategy, or I use the dimensions of the Playing to Win framework, but with the core questions of corporate strategy. But most frameworks that you come across, they are more on the business strategy level. And then finally, you have functional strategy. So this is really about how do the different functions like product development, marketing, sales, HR, finance, and so on, how do they contribute to the business strategy? So this is already, it helps you already to ask the right questions depending on what kind of level of discussion you have and where in the business you are. And obviously, there are interdependencies between these. Well, so whatever you decide on the corporate level will have an impact on the business level. Business level and corporate level, they both can work together with the network strategy and the ecosystem, obviously. And then at the end of the day, the functional strategy needs to be aligned to the business strategy. But again, there are clear tools, questions, frameworks for each of these levels, and very often a problem arises if you start mixing them too much. So just to go a little bit into the details. So as I said, network strategy, core questions here is, where do you compete or where do you collaborate? So what kind of relationship do you want to have with whom, and where to cooperate or where to collaborate, and for what reason? So are you sharing resources, for example? Are you sharing activities, or are you actually even aligning the positions, well, the competitive positions of the companies in your network? And famous example, obviously, of alliances or network strategy is airline alliances. So you have these three dominant airlines. They don't necessarily compete when it comes to or align positions, but they share resources in the capacity, because you can buy seats from United on Lufthansa and the other way around. So it's more about sharing resources. They share the same frequent flyer programs, so it's more sharing activities also on the back end. But position, I would argue that a positioning of a Lufthansa or a Swiss is very different than a positioning of a United Airlines, for example. So good example of network level strategy. Then you have corporate strategy. So here it's about deciding what businesses you want to be in. And as I said, it's a matter of, do you want to diversify or do you want to integrate and look for synergies? And I mean, if you diversify, what kind of industries and businesses do you want to diversify into? If you integrate, there is forward integration, also more on the customer side. There is backward integration, more on the supplier side, and you also have horizontal integration, kind of buying similar businesses to yours. And then once you have these businesses, and this is the link to the business unit strategy, is really how much control do you want to have over the businesses that you are in as a corporate parent? So is it more about integration, so you have a tighter view, and then there is different ways on how to integrate, or do you give more freedom to the business units, so which would be for more responsiveness to the local businesses? And then again, it's also a question of what to integrate. Again, do you want to integrate resources and activities across the businesses, or do you want to go even a step further and make sure that all your businesses are aligned around the same value proposition and the same position in the market? So if you want to be a cost leader, is it cost leadership across all the businesses? If you want to be the innovation leader, is it innovation across all the businesses or not? And examples of sharing resources and activities are some organizations, for example, might have a central sales and marketing organization for that sells the products from all different business units. So that's an example of tighter integration of resources and activities. So all the sales and marketing is bundled, and it's actually centralized. So you see how these things kind of play out. And again, let's say with the airlines, so Lufthansa, this is corporate level Lufthansa. So you have these three big divisions, if you like. You have passenger airlines, and there are a couple more even within that are not on the slide here. Then you have what they call aviation services. So they have airplane maintenance. They have cargo. They have LSG, which is the catering. They do, and they don't only do it for Lufthansa Group, but they also do it for other airlines. And then they have certain what they call business functions. So they have Lufthansa Systems, which is the IT organization. which, for example, if you are a Lufthansa Group customer, you might have noticed that in the last year, over the course of last year, they shifted their mobile apps and the reservation system to actually one system. So no matter what airline you're booking on, the app is always the same. The colors change. So Lufthansa is more blue, Swiss is more red, but it's the same IT. So sharing resources and sharing activities across the businesses in the company. Then we come to the business level. So here is now, how do you compete as a Lufthansa airline, as a Swiss airline, as LSG, or as Lufthansa Systems, for example. So here is really about going more granular into who are the customers you target for that specific business, what are the products and services you sell, how are you going to do this, what's your business model, how are you going to win, and how are you going to actually make money as a business. So, and again, most strategy frameworks that you come across, they actually focus on the business level. And then finally, you have the functional level. And here, there are two things that are quite important to me when developing a functional strategy. So it's really, obviously, it's about contributing to the overall strategy. And the way you contribute to the overall strategy is by actually aligning what you do on a daily basis to the strategy. So as an example, if your business strategy is to say, we want to grow in customer segment B, but your sales organization spends 90% of its time with customer segment A, then what they do on a daily business, how they spend their time on a daily business is not aligned with the strategy. So that's something that I want to look at here. And then I also want to look at what are the challenges that you focus on the functional level that are kind of related to the bigger picture in the business strategy. So that's how you make sure that really your functional strategy is aligned, by focusing on challenges that are relevant and by aligning the activities and making sure you focus on the activities that are required on a business level from the function. So much for the content of the strategy, so the framework. And the final bit I'd like to talk about is briefly a systematic process for doing strategy. So at the end of the day, obviously, the result of this strategizing process should be that you have a successful business that sets your company apart, drives growth, boosts performance, and helps you to actually solve your toughest challenges, as we discussed. And to do that, there are three types of activities that are required. So first of all, you need to have clarity about what is really the core challenge. Richard Rummel calls it the crux that you need to focus on. Right? So you need to be crystal clear about what is the priority for us in terms of what is the challenge that we need to solve. And something like the strategy triage, the tool that I showed you earlier, can help you to come to that conclusion. So being clear about the challenge means that you really have dissected your core problems, and you have also identified the key opportunities. And out of that, you synthesize that into your strategic priorities are clearly defined. Then you need confidence in how to address the challenge. And to have that confidence in your strategy, really, it's always good to develop a couple of options, right? And then to test these options to make sure that you're clear about what is the assumption behind why a certain strategy is actually a good idea. And then you can go out and test these assumptions to make sure the strategy is really a good idea. And then you make a decisive choice, and no more second guessing once you have made the choice actually, and you go with that. And then, which brings us to the third set of activities. Obviously, you need to take action to see results, which means that your strategic moves are clearly defined, your organization is aligned, which happens on that functional strategy level, as I showed you earlier. And you should have the organization, the capabilities, and the whole strategic management system in place that is going to help you do that. And living your strategy actually then means that this is not a linear one-time process, but you do that on a constant basis. So with my clients, when we start implementing strategy, we do at least a monthly review where we kind of look at whether the problem is still the right one, whether we look at the assumptions behind the strategy, are we doing what we are supposed to do on the results level, and is it actually leading to the results that we expected to see, that we planned for when devising our strategy. So you're going through that circle. That's why I show it as a circle in a constant rhythm. Good. So much for time is almost up. We still have time for some questions. Before we go to the questions, I just want to briefly show you this. There is if you're interested in learning more about these 4 levels and the process, then I invite you to join my Better Strategy Intensive, which is going to happen next week. It's 2 times 2 hours online live masterclass. So if you're interested in that and you want to see more details, then head over to my website at snickers.com/BSI, and you're going to learn all about the details there. And if you have any questions, just feel free to DM or email me. So on to your questions. So let me just have a quick look at the chat. I see that there is already a couple of things. If you have more questions, just put them into the chat and I'll have a look at it. So here's Phil asks, how does the approach to strategy rely on ambition, vision coming from leadership? What have been the process? Yeah, and then second part of the question is how to engage the process. Now, ambition and vision. Now, obviously, I talk about or I consider ambition, vision, also values, mission, purpose, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of obviously input to your strategy process, because that's the stuff you want to achieve. That's the impact you want to have. And then it's also, I see vision, values, and these things as kind of constraints. Whatever you come up with a strategy, it has to be compatible, let's say, with your values, for example, with your mission, with your purpose. So it's input, and it's also obviously context for how to evaluate your strategy against, if you like. Now the process, so when it comes to the process, I'm actually going to do another webinar on the process in more detail, on how to engage a larger group of stakeholders in this process. But that's definitely something that I advise my clients to do. So to really think about who are key relevant stakeholders and how can we involve them in the process to define, first of all, what are the real challenges that we need to solve, but then also obviously about getting ideas for the strategy. And what I very often do is having a draft strategy, and we call it a draft on purpose, so that we can go out to stakeholders and get feedback on what do they like, what don't they like, what kind of challenges do they see, or what kind of concerns do they have about the strategy. So I hope that was that. Mariana, business strategy question, how to compete, or could it be how to grow? Yeah, Mariana, so I mean, how to grow is a challenge, right? So I mean, usually we talk about this, where to play, how to win. So that's kind of like, if you say grow, where do we want to grow and how do we make it happen? So that's part of, or it's a particular strategic challenge, how to grow. And if you look at tools like, or frameworks, concepts, methodologies like Blue Ocean Strategy, that's really about how to grow outside of your established market. So it's really a set of strategy tools that helps you with that particular challenge or question of how to grow outside of your established market. And then Ini asks, test how? Well, it depends a lot on, obviously, what are your assumptions on how you're going to test them. There are 3 things that you want to test for. So first of all, you want to test for, is the strategy a good idea from a customer perspective? So do customers want what you actually offering or what you intend to do? You should obviously check from a feasibility perspective. So can our organization do it? Do we have the resources? Do we have the capabilities to actually do it? If not, can we buy them? Can we partner with somebody to get them? So feasibility is something you want to test. And you also want to test whether it makes sense from a business perspective. So you might do a simple business plan calculation to see whether the revenues will be there, whether you can do it at a reasonable cost or not, for example. And then how to test it. So that's what to test, really, how to test it. I mean, what we do, or what I advise my clients often to do, is if you have an idea for a product or an offering, just call 5-10 customers or potential customers and ask them about, is this something that you would be interested in or not? So the testing doesn't have to be very complicated. So it can be something quite easy, just as like calling somebody. Sometimes you might need a more sophisticated market research, but very often the simple things help a lot. So any other questions? Don't hesitate to put them into the chat. I said, yeah, we planned for 45 minutes, so that's it. If you have still more questions, keep on putting them into the comments. I will stay online and answer them throughout the day. I hope the session was valuable. I acknowledge it was really fast, so a lot of stuff. And if you want to dive deeper and have more time actually to discuss, again, here's the invitation to the Better Strategy Intensive, which is happening next week. With that, all the best, and take care, and let's all make better strategy together. Bye.